The machine has been locked out and tagged out. Ensure all isolation and solenoid valves are open and system pressures have equalised. Remove service valve dust caps. Use an Allen key to ensure both valves are open. Remove the gauge port connection cap. Place the manifold. Ensure the manifold taps are shut and gauges are calibrated to 0. Connect a low pressure hose to the service valve and the manifold. The blue gauge now shows the system pressure. Place a recovery unit. Connect a yellow hose from the manifold to the recovery unit's suction side. Place a pump down or reclaim cylinder on the scales. Connect a yellow hose from the recovery unit's discharge to the refrigerant cylinder. Zero out the scales. Open the blue manifold valve. Purge the yellow hose to the recovery unit. Switch the recovery unit to the recover position. Open the recovery unit suction valve. The recovery unit gauges will now read system pressure. Open the recovery unit's discharge valve. Purge the yellow hose to the refrigerant cylinder. And open the refrigerant cylinder valve. Switch the recovery unit on. The recovery unit's red gauge will now read the output pressure. Watch the blue gauge until it reads -10 kPa. This might take some time depending on the size of the system. The blue manifold gauge should also read under 0 kPa. Close the blue manifold valve. Switch the recovery unit off. Wait for a reasonable period of time to check the system pressure doesn't rise above 0 kPa. Check the blue gauge on the manifold after the elapsed period of time. If it has risen above 0 kPa, you'll need to do some more recovery. If it hasn't moved, you're ready to continue. Where fitted, switch the recovery unit to self-clearing. Turn the unit on, which will clear any refrigerant out of the suction pipes and pump. Once the blue gauge goes below 0, turn the unit off. Close the recovery unit suction valve, then close the recovery unit discharge valve. And finally, close the refrigerant cylinder valve. Record the reading on the scales. You can now safely undertake the service required with the knowledge that no refrigerant pressure remains in the system. The system has had refrigerant removed and appropriately stored. Works have been carried out on the system, and now we need to ensure that no leaks are in it. ensure the blue manifold valve is closed. Disconnect the blue hose from the service valve. Connect a red hose from the service valve to the manifold. Place a nitrogen bottle. Attach a regulator to the bottle and ensure the regulator valve is wound completely out. Disconnect the yellow hose from the recovery unit and attach to the regulator output. Open the nitrogen cylinder valve. The inside regulator gauge will show the cylinder pressure. Screw in the regulator valve to the desired test pressure. This will read on the outside regulator gauge. Open the red valve on the manifold. The red gauge will start to rise as nitrogen enters the system. Watch the red gauge until it reaches the desired test pressure. This may take 2 or 3 minutes. Close the red valve on the manifold. Perform leak tests on recently replaced or repaired components. Close the nitrogen cylinder valve and perform a drop test as follows. Wait for a period of time as specified in the RHCP, the Refrigerant Handling Code of Practice. Check the red gauge on the manifold after this elapsed period of time. If the gauge has fallen, the test has failed. Look for a leak. If the gauge is unchanged, then the test has passed and you can continue. Disconnect the yellow hose from the regulator. Wind out the regulator valve and open the red valve on the manifold. Nitrogen from the system will vent into the atmosphere. The red gauge will read 0 kPa when all nitrogen's been released. Close the red gauge and the pressure leak test is completed. The system has had refrigerant removed and passed a pressure test. Place the pump down cylinder or a new refrigerant cylinder on the scales. Attach the yellow hose to the refrigerant cylinder. Disconnect the red hose from the service valve. Connect a vacuum gauge through a ball valve to a T-piece and attach this to the service valve. Connect the blue hose to the T-piece. Place a vacuum pump. Attach a red hose from the manifold to the vacuum pump inlet. Open the blue manifold valve and open the red manifold valve. Open the ball valve. Turn on the vacuum pump. The vacuum gauge will now display dropping pressure as the vacuum pump removes any non-condensables and moisture from the system. Watch the vacuum gauge until it reaches 500 or less microns, as referred in the RHCP. Close the blue manifold valve and close the red manifold valve. Switch the vacuum pump off. Wait for a period of time as specified in the RHCP Check the vacuum gauge after the elapsed period of time. If the pressure rises by more than 100 microns, run the evacuation process again. If the pressure does not rise by more than 100 microns, continue on. Close the ball valve. The evacuation process is now complete and the system is ready for charging. The system has been evacuated and is ready for charging. Do not open any connections. The system is under vacuum. Zero the scales. Ensure the blue manifold valve is closed. Ensure the red manifold valve is closed. Ensure the ball valve is closed. Open the refrigerant cylinder. Open the blue manifold valve. The blue gauge will now show refrigerant cylinder pressure. Refrigerant will be moving from the refrigerant cylinder into the system. Watch the readout on the scales until the correct amount has moved from the tank into the system. If the system has not taken the full charge, it will be necessary to run the machine in cooling mode in order to charge the system to the correct quantity. Once the system has taken the full charge, close the refrigerant cylinder while the system is still running. This sucks the contents of the hoses into the system. Now close the blue manifold valve. Disconnect the T-piece with the vacuum gauge from the service valve. Remove all hoses. Then replace all system and refrigerant cylinder dust caps and valve connection caps. Leak test the system as per the RHCP. And the charging process is now complete.